Yeah, I was looking at that. Thank you. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is our 14th annual Mars Society Convention. We're really happy that you're here with us today in very hot Dallas, Texas. We appreciate all that you did to come here and to be here with us. Just a few morning announcements before we get things started. Yesterday we didn't have tote bags, so we do have them today. So if you see some of the registrants have them, if you didn't get yours, no worries. Just show your badge at the registration desk right outside this door to the right, and we'll get you a tote bag right away. We do have coffee service for you. The coffee service is out this door and to the left, and then make a second left, and that's just specifically for our conference attendees, and that's complimentary to you. Thank you. Also, if you see people in orange shirts, there's one over here, there's one in the back. The orange shirts are at registration. Those are all our volunteers and can help you with any questions that you might have while at our convention. So we have a full day today. We're really excited about the speakers that we have, and we want to just get started. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker this morning. We have Homer Hickam, best-selling author for his 1999 book, Rocket Boys, turned into a movie called October Sky. He also co-authored a book called My Dream of Stars, the story of Anousheh Ansari, the Iranian woman who fought her way into space. So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Homer Hickam.
Wherever you want to. Okay. Thank you. We'll do it later. Well, good morning. Good to see everybody. I brought several books here. I'm just going to read them from cover to cover, and we'll be done. Perhaps. We'll see. As a matter of fact, if I do end up a little bit short this morning, I would love Q&A. Q&A is always a lot of fun. That way I know that there's at least one person in the audience that's actually interested in what I'm saying. Robert's been after me for some years to come and speak to the Mars Society, and it wasn't because I didn't want to, that it didn't happen. It was just a matter of schedule and so on. And this time when he asked, I said, sure, I'll be happy to come down to Dallas. Maybe I'll get to hang out with Anousheh. Unfortunately, she's in Dubai today, so that didn't work out. And I also said, well, I'll be in between books, and I'll have a little free time, and that didn't work out. So I was just talking to some folks earlier about the book that I'm working on right now. Robert probably won't like this. It's set on the moon, and but it's 150 years from now. I'll probably still be around, but Robert probably won't make it. So no. Hickams are long-lived for some reasons. Because we're ornery, I guess. But it's a book called Crater, and it's the first of the Helium-3 series, and it's set in a little mining town, which very similar to the one that I grew up in West Virginia. I guess in a way, I'm kind of living proof of the fact that the American people, and actually the people all over the world, still really do love our space program. And that's because of the love that they have shown for this book that I wrote. It came out back in 1998 called Rocket Boys, that you may know as October Sky. If that's all that you know of it, but it's October Sky and you've just seen the movie, I don't like you. No, I'm just kidding. How many of you, by the way, have seen the movie October Sky? Good. How many of you read the book Rocket Boys? I got work to do with you. And how many of you read my most recent novel called The Dinosaur Hunter? Thank you. You're beloved in the Hickam family. In 1994, I was an engineer for NASA up at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. I was not a big wig. My job was to train the astronauts to fly on Space Lab and then later Space Station. I took that job because I thought it was pretty easy. As far as I could tell from hanging around them, astronauts already knew everything or thought they did, so I figured training them would be, pretty easy. So that was my job. But I was also a writer on the side. I'd written a book called Torpedo Junction, which is the history of the U-boat wars up and down the East Coast. It's still in print, came out in 1989. It was a national bestseller, and I was kind of known for that. Over on the side, I kind of two lives. I was leading two lives. One is the author of Torpedo Junction. The other is this training guy at Marshall Space Flight Center who had an easy job and woke up every morning and said, "Oh boy, I get to go work for NASA. How cool is that?" But I was sitting in my office minding my own business like I typically do when I got a call from Pat Trenner, who was the editor of Smithsonian Air and Space magazine. She said, "Homer, we need an article of 2,000 words out of you. We had, it's sort of a filler article, but we got a big gap in the magazine. We had an article that was going to be written by, named the author, and said it was terrible, and we need this filler, just 2,000 words, and you got the reputation of being a fast writer. Could you write that for?" And it didn't say I was a good writer. She said fast writer. So I looked over on my desk, and there sat something that I just put there the week before. It was a perfectly crafted steel De La Salle rocket nozzle that had been built in the machine shops of the little town where I grew up, Colwood, West Virginia. And that it just happened to be there because right before my dad died, he was the superintendent of Colwood and the little mining town. He died of black lung, and he knew it was about to get him, and right before he passed, he said, "Elsie," my mom's name is Elsie, "Elsie, we ought to box up all of our son's stuff," and I have an older brother, "and ship them back, because we've been carrying all this stuff around for years and years. They're old toys, they're old Lionel train set, and all this kind of stuff." And so they did, and that was been back in the late 1980s, and they shipped it to me, and I put all those boxes in my garage and forgot about it. But the week before Pat called me, I was out in the garage, and I looked over, and I glancing at those boxes again, like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And I noticed, for some reason, on one of them, a shoebox, there was my dad's handwriting. All the other had my mom's handwriting on it. And all my dad had done was to write my name on it, Sonny. I could tell he had a little crabby type of handwriting, and I thought, well, now what's this? So I looked in that shoebox, and inside there was that rocket nozzle that I mentioned, and also a gold medal from the 1960 National Science Fair, but I had long since forgotten that I had won. And so my dad, for whatever reason, had saved those things for me all those years. And so now when Pat called me this, I looked over on my desk and I saw that rocket nozzle, and I said, "Well, Pat, I could write you 2,000 words on when I was a kid growing up in Colwood, West Virginia, and we built rockets." And I have to say that she was completely, totally, utterly underwhelmed with this idea. Nobody's going to care about that, Homer. So I did it anyway. And I'm a fast writer, and as I wrote it, I started remembering a lot of details about when I was that boy back in West Virginia and building those rockets, and my parents, and how my dad was against it and my mom was for it, and Miss Riley, my teacher, who backed us up, and the other rocket boys, and all the adventures that we had. And I compressed that as best I could into 2,000 words and sent it up there. And Pat called I faxed it up, and Pat called the next morning. She said, "Homer, I think you're really onto something. So half my office has been laughing at your article, and the other half's been crying. You're really onto something. We're going to make this into a major article. Do you have pictures of when you built these rockets, blah, blah?" I did, and when it came out a couple of months later, my phone literally, not literally, but it seemed like, melted down. I got calls from all over the country, mostly from teachers and parents, who said, "This is a wonderful story. I'm going to share that with my child, or I'm going to share that with my students." And It's just, it's what our country needs right now. We need stories like this to get our kids enthusiastic about engineering and science, or just about their future. The next calls I started to get was from New York publishers, asking me if I was going to write a book about this. And I said, well, I am now. So that's how I came to write Rocket Boys. And Rocket Boys has been a phenomenon. I think it does illustrate that there is a great deal of love in this country and the world for the idea of folks bringing themselves up from nothing, and especially moving into the arena of space. I mean, besides making that movie, by the way, I apologize to all the young women for actually not being Jake Gyllenhaal. I get a lot of that. It's like, sometimes I go out and talk to schools, and especially in high schools, I'm looking at all these beautiful young ladies with disappointment written all over their faces. Like, who the heck is this old white-haired dude, and where is that boy in the movie? I always remind them that I actually do have Jake's cell phone number, and I can be bought, so. The movie has been beloved around the world, as has the book. The book is the most picked book for city and community and library reads across the country, well ahead of second place To Kill a Mockingbird. I reminded Harper Lee of that when I met her, and got the frowny face from Miss Lee on that. It has also been published in a bunch of languages, including Vietnamese. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I got the opportunity to go back to Vietnam with my book coming out. It was great. People were buying my books. Nobody was shooting at me. I just loved the place. And so it has done a lot for it. Rocket Boys is actually coming out in a Broadway musical next. Coal Miners Dancing, folks. You've got to see this. It's actually a great musical. A lot of Broadway producers came to me and suggested that Rocket Boys be made into a show over the years, and I kept turning them down, mainly because Universal Studios actually owns a big part of the rights, and I was tired of dealing with them. They're a tough bunch to deal with. But a young group out of New York came in with the idea of a musical, and actually they had written some of the music, and it was so wonderful that I agreed to help make this happen. So Rocket Boys, the musical, is actually premiering this summer. To get a show on Broadway, you have to go through a lot of stages, and one of them is to have it presented by in other places like Dallas or San Diego or Chicago, some of the big off-Broadway towns. And Rocket Boys, the musical's cases, we're doing it in West Virginia, which is great. They have a professional group there called Theater West Virginia. They spell it Theatre. They get a little fancy about that. Theater West Virginia, and so they're putting on the show this summer, August 26th through September 3rd. It'll be our first time seeing it with all the sets and the costumes and all that kind of good stuff. And we've already got, I understand, just every night is almost sold out. If you want to look at that and you happen to live close to Beckley, West Virginia, or up in the D.C. area, it's an easy transit down, go to rocketboysthemusical.com, and there you'll see some information on it. Of course, the movie's still being shown. Every substitute teacher in the country shows October Sky. I hear from a lot of the kids who say, Homer, I've seen your dumb movie about 8 times, and I'm just sick of it. So, have you read the book? No? Get busy. Overnight, there was actually, a lot of you probably got up this morning and didn't notice on the news, but there were some pretty exciting things happen. The Dow Jones, if you keep up with the market, rose from 1,100 to over 30,000 overnight. Our unemployment rate dropped from 9.5%, real rate, 20, to 3.5%. You aware of that? The number of students changing or choosing engineer, math, and science degrees was estimated by the universities across the country as multiplied by 10, just overnight. The National Chamber of Commerce made the announcement that they are predicting a severe labor shortage for the next decade. New businesses are opening up at an exponential rate. The United Nations has announced a worldwide energy surplus. OPEC has announced it will no longer be a functioning body. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. I'm giving you the news that would have happened if we had continued our space program as we should have after Apollo. It makes you wonder what would have happened if all the Apollo flights had been flown, and because of its success, NASA had actually been rewarded with an increase in their budget and their mission rather than being cut. I maintain that the news that I just reported would have been a reality. And I think that I can back that up. And I'll go back to the story of Rocket Boys and the story of Coalwood to kind of prove it. A lot of folks, mostly because you weren't alive, back in the late 1950s, don't remember that we were actually in a pretty horrid recession. We certainly felt it in Coalwood because Coalwood was a one-industry town. It was coal. And when we had this economic recession, well, it wasn't as deep as this one is right now, but almost, and the people were feeling about the same. Steel stopped being made very much, and then therefore the demands for coal, our coal was metallurgical coal, went down, and Coalwood really started feeling the effects of that. And we were seeing, for the first time since I had been born, back in 1943, that's right before the dinosaurs died out for you. We were starting to having to cut off miners, and my dad was having to do that every day. He was having to go up and basically let miners go, and they didn't really have anywhere to go, but they had to leave Coalwood. Coalwood was a pure company town. Every house, every tree, every road, every business, everything in Coalwood was owned by the company. And it was a requirement for all adult males in order to live in Coalwood actually had to work for the coal mine. Every adult female in order to live in Coalwood had to be married to a coal miner, or they could be a teacher. There was also the church was also belonged to the company, and the preacher was a company man. For some reason, they put the preacher on a 3-year contract. I never understood why they did that. That meant every 3 years we actually changed our religion in Coalwood. We used to laugh and say we got the low bid religion. You know, I mean, sometimes we were Baptists, and then we get to be Methodist, which was a lot easier than being Baptist. We'd get to be Methodist for a few years. One time we were some sort of Pentecostal. I think he was a little bit Jewish, the preacher. We never could quite figure out what he was up to. But anyway, that was the kind of town that Coalwood was. And my parents, my dad was the mine superintendent, and he was very much aware of this deep recession that we were involved in. And my mom, just give you an idea how my mom and dad got along. Very quick on my name. My full name is Homer Hadley Hickam, Jr. Go through life with that, folks. That's kind of a heavy burden. And I used to complain about it. Because my older brother, my dad's name is Homer Hadley Hickam, so I'm a junior. My older brother, and usually people in West Virginia anyway, name their oldest son after the father, if they're going to name him after the father at all. His name was Jim. It's on a birth certificate, Jim. Jim Hickam. If your name is Jim Hickam, you are naturally going to be a football star and get all the girls. But if your name is Homer Hadley Hickam Jr. So I used to complain about that. And Mom explained that the reason that I had this name was that she and Dad were absolutely sure, and all the women in town were absolutely sure that the baby coming was going to be a girl. And Mom had worked really hard to figure out what the name of this girl was going to be, and she had picked Susie. So Susie was kind of ingrained in her mind about it. And but she said, Susie is going to be born in a hospital, Homer. Now, no kid had ever been born in a hospital in Coalwood, but they had built one 7 miles away in 2 mountains. Everything's measured in mountains in West Virginia. And we were trying to entice people to go to the hospital. And it was like, why would I want to go to a hospital? I'm sick. The doctor should come to me. And that's the way it was in Coalwood. They had a company doctor, and the doctor came to you. That made sense. And so Dad told my mom, Elsie, no, you can just have little Susie up there in the bed, you know, where it started 9 months ago. So, but come the night that little Susie was to be born, there was a huge snowstorm, one of the biggest blizzards that West Virginia had ever seen. And my dad laughed and said, well, Elsie, I guess you're not going to make it to the hospital, since she was already in, you know, labor pains. And my mom said, well, I guess we'll see about that. And she hiked up her skirts and went through the snow and to next door and got the neighbor lady there to take her car. It was an old Packard. And drive her over those 2 mountains over icy roads, curvy roads. There's about a 1,000-foot drop off the edge of them. And off they go, and my dad's on the back porch yelling, you'll never make it. But they did, and little Susie was born that night with a little extra. And so my dad wouldn't come over to, he wanted to make a point, so he refused to come over to the hospital. Mom hung out there for about 2 weeks. I mean, they were desperate for patients, and so, you know. And so finally his boss forced my dad to go over, and he walked in the hospital room and saw Mom holding me and took one look and said, Elsie, that's the ugliest baby I've ever seen in my life, and turned around and walked out. And the next person in was the nurse with the clipboard, and she said, well, Mrs. Hickam, have you finally figured out what you're going to name this baby boy? And she said, why, yes. I'm going to name this one after his father. And so that's why I got stuck with Homer Hadley Hickam Jr. And however, Mom took pity on me and called me Sonny, which is close as she could get to Susie, I guess. And that's, I was raised with that nickname. Now, so there we were in Coalwood, and my parents weren't agreeing about very much, and we were in this deep recession, and coal was in trouble, and miners were being laid off. And what do you know? Just like Mark Twain and my mom used to say, God looks after fools, drunks, in the United States of America. She used to add, and my little Sonny boy. But the Russians launched the world's first Earth satellite. And it was like a hammer been hit right between the eyes of most Americans. They couldn't imagine, well, the Russians were our big enemy, the Soviet Union was our big enemy. They had nuclear weapons, and they were going to blow us up, and we had nuclear weapons, and we were going to blow them up. And everybody was pretty afraid that now the Russians actually maybe did have something where they could blow us up, and they were putting these things in space. And so everybody was really terrified about that, and that news even reached, you know, little Coalwood, West Virginia. And but I've been a big reader of science fiction all my life. That's about all I was good for, was reading. I was pretty much a poor, awful student. So I thought it was pretty cool that we, you know, had something really real in space. And I got to thinking, you know, I'd like to see it. And it was in the local paper and said that Sputnik was actually going to fly over Coalwood one night. And so I told my mom I was going to go watch Sputnik fly over, and she told the neighbor lady, Mrs. Sherritts, who told that neighbor lady, Mrs. McLaughlin, who told the next neighbor lady, Mrs. Todd. I can name all these families down the row. And I guess it kind of indicates that there wasn't a whole lot to do in Coalwood, because that night when Sputnik was scheduled to fly over, we had about half the town in my backyard. And my dad walked out and said, Elsie, why are all these people in our backyard? And she said, well, Homer, they're here to help Sonny watch Sputnik fly over. And he said, well, they can all just go home. President Eisenhower would never allow anything Russian to fly over Coalwood. And so he put on his hat and never looked up and went on up to the coal mine. And sure enough, that night Sputnik did fly over. And I was just enthralled. I mean, God himself had flown over that moment in a golden chariot. I would not have been more impressed by seeing this bright little ball fly over Coalwood, where nothing ever happened except what happened in Coalwood, and the whole rest of the world, that was someplace else. But here was what everybody was talking about, flew over Coalwood. And after seeing that, I thought to myself, whoa, I want to be part of that. And there was this fellow called Werner von Braun I'd read about in the paper, and he was down in, well, I wasn't sure exactly where he was. I thought maybe he was down at Cape Canaveral. And wherever he was, I thought I'd like to go work with him if he's going to do things like the Sputnik thing. And I thought, well, how can I go work for Dr. von Braun? And I remember going up to the mine and hanging around Dad's office while he was hiring people, and the miners, and he would say, so what can you do? And the miner would say, well, I can run a joy loader, or I can run a continuous mining machine, or I'm a welder, or whatever it was. And I thought to myself, that's it, I've got to get in front of Dr. von Braun, and he'll say, well, what can you do? And I'd say, I can build a rocket. I could build a rocket. And so I announced that around the kitchen table. My dad would come home from the mine long enough for supper. That was Mom's requirement. Sometimes he sat there, he was still covered with coal dirt. But he'd have his supper and off he'd go, and we would talk about what we had done that day. And when it got to be my turn, I said, I didn't do anything today, but I'm going to build a rocket. And my dad was eating his dessert of cornbread and milk. It's actually pretty good, you ought to try it. But anyway, he was eating his dessert that he had every night, and he didn't even look up. It just bounced right off of him, I guess. My brother, my older brother, the football hero, got all the girls, Jim, he laughed. To give you an idea how my brother and I got along, he used to introduce me as his sister. And I'd hit him with my purse and run after, no. But he just laughed. I'm sure he thought that was a very sister thing to do. But my mom took a long look at me, and she said, well, don't blow yourself up. I'd like to read to you, very short, what happened next. I appointed myself chief rocket designer. Odell, who was the garbage man's son, provided me with a small discarded plastic flashlight to use as the body of the rocket. I emptied its batteries and then punched a hole in its base with a nail. I cracked open my cherry bombs left over from 4th of July and poured the powder from them into the flashlight and then wrapped it all up in electrical tape. You can kind of tell where this is going already, can't you? I took one of the cherry bomb fuses left over and stuck it in the hole and then glued the entire apparatus inside the fuselage of a D-wing plastic model airplane. I recall it was an F-100 Super Sabre. Since Sherman, who had polio and couldn't run very fast, and also because it was his idea, he was placed in charge of a countdown, a position that allowed him to stand back. Roy Lee was to bring the matches. Odell was to strike the match and hand them to me. I would like to fuse and make a run for it. Everybody had something to do. When night came, we balanced our rocket looking wicked and sleek on top of my mother's rose garden fence. The fence was a source of some pride and satisfaction to her. Taken 6 months of her reminding Dad to send the company carpenter down to build it. The night was cold and clear, all the better, we thought, for us to track our rocket as it streaked across the dark and starry sky. We waited until some coal cars rumbled past, and then I lit the fuse and ran back to the grass at the edge of the rose bushes. Odell smacked his hand over his mouth to smother his excited giggle. Sparkles of fire dribbled out of the fuse. Sherman was counting backward from 10. We waited expectantly, and then Sherman reached 0 and yelled, "Blast off," just as the cherry bomb powder detonated. There was an eyewitness, a miner waiting for a ride at the gas station across the street. For the edification of the fence gossipers, he would later describe what he had seen. There was, he reported, a huge flash in the Hickams' yard and a sound like God himself had clapped his hands. Then an arc of fire lifted up and up into the darkness, turning and cartwheeling and spewing bright sparks the way the man told it. Our rocket was a beautiful and glorious sight. And I guess he was right as far as it went. The only problem was it wasn't our rocket that streaked into that dark, cold, clear, and starry night. It was my mother's rose garden fence. After the dogs stopped barking up and down the valley, people came out on their porches and wondered what was going on. My mom and dad came out. It was easy to see me. First place, I was all alone. The other boys had disappeared through a rather large gap in the fence, and the rest of the fence was on fire. So I could be seen, and Dad took one look and said, "Elsie, you handle it," and walked back inside. Mom came out and looked at all the debris and everything and said, "Sonny, I got a question for you. Do you think you could actually build a rocket?" And I thought by all the evidence around me, but the answer was clear. And she said, "Do you know what your dad has planned for you after you graduate from high school?" Or as he says, if you graduate from high school. And I was astonished at that because I didn't know Dad knew I was alive, much less he had a plan for me. And she said, I heard him talking to the union chief the other day, and they think after you graduate from high school, maybe they can get you a little job up at the coal mine. They decided after talking over your attributes that you'd probably be pretty good at counting the number of cars that went by. Neither one of them think you're smart enough to actually go inside the mine, but we thought they think that maybe they could do that for you. And just for a moment, I thought to myself, I wonder how much that pays. But she said, I think you're better than that. I think that there's more to you than even you know. And I've been saving up money, and I can actually send you to college. Your brother's going on a football scholarship. He doesn't need it, but you will. And but I have to convince your dad to let me spend it. Your dad, we have a joint checking account, and this is an account he doesn't even know about, but it still has to be a joint account because, I can't write a check by myself. That was true back in West Virginia in 1957. Women were not allowed to have their own bank account, and unless a man co-signed it. And so if you want to go to college, you've got to somehow convince your dad that you're worthy of going to college. And I'm thinking that maybe just building this rocket thing might just be the ticket. So if you want to really learn how to build a rocket, then I'm behind you. And so that night started this 3-year adventure that I write about in Rocket Boys that ultimately brought in Miss Riley and all my teachers, and actually the whole town of Coalwood got involved. Machinists down at the machine shop would much rather work on my rockets than they would Dad's mining machinery. My dad was against it almost all the way, and the principal at the high school was against it, and everybody was against the Rocket Boys at Coalwood for a long time. And the recession got deeper and deeper, and pretty soon the people of Coalwood and the people of southern West Virginia started paying attention to these Rocket Boys and what we were doing, and we gave them hope. We gave them hope that there was going to be a brighter future somehow. They just kind of grabbed hold of that. And we became sort of the local celebrities. And every time we went down to fire a rocket, whether it blew up or not, we started getting more and more people down there. High school cheerleaders even started showing up. It was incredible. And let me give you an idea of course, it's 3 years of a lot of ups and downs. But just to give you an idea, I read to you about the first rocket. Let me read to you what happened on the last rocket. And this was after we came back from the National Science Fair with that gold medal. And we thought we'd do something for the whole town for looking out for us. My dad had never come to any of the rocket launches or anything. But we wanted to do something for the town, so we wanted to fire our last rockets, which we had done until we got to the very last one, a rocket called Auk 31. We named our rockets after a bird that couldn't fly. We had kind of a sense of humor about that. Auk 31 was our last and biggest rocket, 6.5 feet long, 2 1/4 inches in diameter. We carefully raised it into a vertical position and then lowered it on the launch rod. With a rocket this size, I thought perhaps we were exceeding the critical dimensions of our propellant, Zincoshine. Zincoshine, by the way, was zinc dust, sulfur, and a binder of 100% pure alcohol made in the local moonshiner still. It worked great. It was hot stuff. I hoped it wouldn't blow up, but I knew it might. I knelt at its base and started twisting together the ignition wire connection. "Sonny," Royley said, "do you see who's here?" And I looked up from my work. "Who?" "Just look." The town constable opened a path through the crowd, and there stood my dad in his work clothes. And Royley went after him and escorted him out on the slack, and I heard Royley say, "Come and help us, Mr. Hickam." "Oh, you don't need my help," Dad said. "I just came to watch." "Oh, whatever you want to do, sir, you go ahead and do it." And I stood up and said, "A rocket won't fly unless somebody lights the fuse. Come on, Dad, this one's yours if you want it." I was surprised. There was no mistaking the pure delight I saw spread across Dad's face as he knelt in front of the panel. And Royley called from the back door. "Whenever you're ready," he said. I counted down to 0, and Dad turned the switch. Occ 31 erupted, blowing huge chunks of concrete loose from the pad. The crowd took a step backward, and some of them started to run. Occ 31 seemed to split the air that filled the narrow valley, a shockwave rippling across the slack. Women screamed, and men clapped their hands to their ears. The thunderous din did not stop. Occ 31 kept pounding us as it climbed. Men, women, and children all watched it with mouths agape, eyes wide, their tears stuck in their throats. At the company store, of us few old men not at the launch got uncertainly to their feet as the thunder reached them. They stumbled into the road, shading their eyes. The trunk of fire and smoke tearing out of the mountains like God's finger stuck suddenly toward the sky. And in his church, the preacher raced to the belfry and began to toll the bell in celebration. Some of the engineers down from Ohio were on the clubhouse roof with their girlfriends in our old telescope, and they raised their beers to what they saw rising from the mountains. Royley kept his eye on his watch. 38, 39, 40. "Still see it," Billy announced. The great spout of smoke turned into a dim yellowish streak. "Just about gone." 43, 44. "Gone," Billy announced. "Gone at 44 seconds. I did a quick calculation. Assuming it was flying nearly vertical, Occ 31 had disappeared at an altitude of 31,000 feet, nearly 6 miles high. I became aware of movement beside me, and I was astonished to see Dad dancing on the slack dump, waving his old hat in his hand. He was exulting to the sky. Beautiful, beautiful. And as Occ 31 raced across the sunlit sky on that glorious day, I instead watched my dad and waited patiently and with hope for him to put his arm around my shoulder and tell me at last that I had done something good. There, I heard Billy yell, "There it is," and people surged from the road across the slack, following the other boys as they raced after our last great rocket. And Dad stopped his dance, and he put his hat over his heart, and he bent over as if a great weight had suddenly been dropped on his back. He looked at me, and his mouth open, and I saw in his eyes a curious mixture of happiness and pain that dissolved into fear. And I went to him and put my arm around his shoulder, supporting him while he fought for air against the black lung that would kill him all too soon. "You did really good, Dad," I told him as a spasm of deep, oily coughs racked his body. "Nobody ever launched a rocket better than you." Thank you. Thank you. Well, we weren't alone in all that, as you well know, most of you know. Because of Sputnik, droves of students started going into engineering school, into the sciences, into math. The government started putting money into the schools, and especially for the sciences. Our entire curriculum was reorganized in 1958. I recall somebody saying, well, the Russians might have launched Sputnik in 1957, but the United States launched its students in 1958. And that was true. We were totally inspired. It wasn't the race that the press made it into. We weren't interested in racing the Russians. I kind of want to meet some of the Russian students, see what they were up to. What we were interested in was moving out into space. We could see this bright future opening up before us, and we truly believed that it was the future. Space was the future, and we really wanted to be part of it. John Kennedy came along. Cut taxes? Yes, he did. And he also really started the space program. Eisenhower had done a little bit. There were a few things done, but by challenging us to go to the moon, we hit high gear. And all these students that were out in engineering school and the sciences and everywhere were coming in and starting to fill in the gaps that were there, and there were a bunch of them to be filled. One of the things that didn't make the movie that's in the book was the fact that I met John Kennedy in 1960. Before he became president, he was in Welch, the county seat of McDowell County, trying to get the Democratic nomination. There was the West Virginia primary. He was running against Hubert H. Humphrey, who I kind of liked because he had the same initials I did. I was actually over in Welch the same day that Kennedy was there. Recently, a photograph showed up on Facebook that shows me there with Kennedy, which is kind of interesting. I had gone over to buy a suit for the National Science Fair, and they had convinced me to buy one that was essentially orange in color, and it'd probably been hanging on the rack for 50 years. I couldn't get rid of it. I'd bought it. I thought, well, that's a good idea. I want to show up, you know. I want to look good. So I was actually in that orange suit when I wandered down where Kennedy was standing on top of a Lincoln giving a speech. They had played the naval anthem right before that, and that's what kind of drew me to it. And his speech was on how he was going to invent this thing called food stamps, and everybody was going to be on welfare in McDowell County because the coal mines were so terrible, and it was all good. The federal government was going to give him a whole bunch of money, and his audience happened to be working coal miners. They're covered with coal. It was pretty obvious, and they're listening to this. First place, you could only understand about every third word. He had an accent, you know, and they were completely, totally, utterly underwhelmed with Kennedy's speech about welfare and food stamps. They didn't care 2 cents about any of that. And he finally wound down and just kind of looked at everybody, and everybody looked at him, and he said, "Does anybody have any questions?" And I raised my hand, and for some reason, he noticed me right off. And true story, I have a lot of witnesses, and I said to Jack Kennedy, who had probably never given 2 seconds of thought on this, "What do you think we ought to do in space?" I was a rocket boy. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, what do you think we ought to do in space?" And I thought that was most unfair of him to turn a question around on me. But we had a little telescope on top of the clubhouse there in Coalwood, and I was always real nearsighted, and what I could see, I couldn't see the stars or Mars, but I could see the moon. And so it was just a natural thing for me to say, well, I think we should go to the moon. And he did the same thing. He said, well, why would we want to go to the moon? And I looked around at all those coal miners, and I said, well, we could just go up there and mine the dang thing. Lots of witnesses. And Kennedy said, well, if you elect me president, maybe we will go to the moon. And the miners got into it. All right, heck yeah, let's go on up there. Let's get that moon. Let's mine that moon. We can mine that puppy. And he got into it, and he said, well, you know, we need to get the country moving again if you want to go to the moon, and you got to help me get the country moving. And that sort of became his message. And years later, when I was working for NASA, I started during the shuttle era, 1981. I missed Apollo. I was doing the Vietnam thing and other stuff. And those old Apollo guys would drag into my office every once in a while, all hangdog and everything, and they'd say, oh, Homer, you should have been here during the Apollo time. Why, it was just a glorious time. And I said, you'd never gone anywhere if I hadn't asked Jack Kennedy that question back in Welch. But I think Wernher von Braun had a lot more to do with it than I did. And now what Kennedy did, whether he realized it or not, was he basically set the stage for our prosperity for the next 40 years. All the new products, all the new technologies, all the new metallurgy, everything, the new ways of looking at things, all of these things got into the American system and our idea set. because of the space program. And even Vietnam, and even all the dumb wars that we've been into ever since, had not been able to turn us around on that until it just seems kind of recently, maybe. But we were definitely living all of our prosperity. If you look into it, you can just trace it right back to Kennedy's decision. Let's go to the moon. Let's test ourselves and see if we're capable of doing it. And all the new products, but more than the products, I think, was our mindset. If we can go to the moon, we can do anything. What came out of that, unfortunately, with our politicians and our media was if we can go to the moon, we've done it, and we don't need to do it anymore. And we don't need to go to Mars, and we don't need to do all the other things that we really should do. If we truly want to have that report that I gave you this morning with the Dow over 30,000 and our unemployment rate down to 3.5% and a labor shortage and putting OPEC out of business and everything else, then we, in this audience, know how to do it. We instinctively know how to do it. To be a great nation, you have to do great things. A great thing would be to go back to the moon. A great thing would be to go to Mars, live there, open up the whole solar system. We are capable of doing that, and we should do that. And it's for our own good. It's for our own prosperity. It's for our own future. So if you're a true believer like I am, you are definitely, I have no doubt that every time you say, well, I think we ought to go to Mars, I think we need to live there, then they come right back at you, whoever you're talking to, a lot of them, these Luddites out there, that say, well, it just costs too much money, we can't afford to go do that. And you just want to look at these people and say, you wouldn't even be alive if it would, probably. You look sickly to me. If all, if all the medical advances hadn't been made that came directly out of what NASA did back in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, you probably wouldn't be around to even talk about any of this. So you just want to slap them sometimes. You really, really do. But I want to give you some hope. After 9/11, I was out on the Sky of Stone tour, which was the third in the Rocket Boys trilogy. There's Rocket Boys, The Coldwood Way, Sky of Stone, and since I'm from West Virginia, we decided to add a fourth book to the trilogy called We Are Not Afraid. And how we Are Not Afraid came about was this. The Sky of Stone tour was 1 week after 9/11. How's that for good timing? And I flew in airplanes that were totally empty. Except one time there was a Pakistani doctor sitting across from me in first class, and he looked really worried. And so I went over there and kept him company and said, I think it's going to be okay. But anyway, the people, you have to kind of put yourself back at that time. People were really worried about being in large groups like this one or indefinitely flying. People were scared, in other words. And they, people would say, well, Homer, thank you for coming. We just can't believe that you're actually flying around an airplane and doing all that. And then one day I was in Nashville, and C-SPAN was there. And C-SPAN interviewed me, and they said, so how is it that you're not afraid to go out and do this and fly on airplanes and all that? And I said, well, I don't know. I guess it's because I come from a people who are not afraid. When you stop to think about it, when I grew up, my parents and all the parents that I knew and all the grown-ups, every day the man went off to the coal mine, deep, dark, dirty coal mine, and there wasn't any guarantee he would be back at the end of the day. And actually, there was a rule in Coalwood that if a miner was killed in the mine, the family had 2 weeks to leave Coalwood. Because they needed a house for the next miner family. And so it was really kind of a prescription for fear if you looked at it that way. But actually, I remember growing up, and it was a great life, and people were happy and did really well and had a great optimistic spirit about them. And I said, well, the reason I think that was because of the way they thought about things. For one thing, they were really proud of who they were. They were coal miners, and without coal, the country would die. It's still true, by the way. Coal provides over 50% of our energy needs and will for the foreseeable future. Thank goodness for the coal miner. When you turn your computer on, thank a coal miner. But we actually have more coal than any other country in the world combined. And that's a blessing. We actually probably have more oil, just a matter of going after it. But anyway, we were proud of who we were. And you need to take that mindset too, that you believe in this vision that Robert Zubrin has of going to Mars, and going into the solar system, and living in the solar system. You believe that, and it's your belief set, and it's something you should be proud of. You are just so leagues ahead of these narrow thinkers that sometimes surround us and unfortunately get the voice on radio and TV. In Coalwood, we stood up for what we believed. Every kid was taught to stand up for what he believed, no matter what it was, no matter how unpopular it was. And we were taught not to do that in a shrill way, not to carry signs and beat people over the head and call them ugly names. We were taught to marshal our argument and present it in a forceful but cogent way, and therefore you stood the best chance of winning your argument. So, as believers in the Mars Society, we need to also do the same thing. We need to be proud of who you are and stand up for what you believe. Just don't take that. Marshal your argument. Make it cogent. Present it. Don't get into a big argument. Don't call them names. Yeah, they're idiots, just between you and me. But the other one is, in Coalwood, we kept our families together. The only boy that I knew, the only kid I knew growing up in Coalwood whose parents were divorced was this kid that showed up during the summer to visit his grandparents. Now, my parents never agreed on anything, and they stayed married till the day that Dad died. And we all knew that in Coalwood, that we were going to keep our family together no matter what. And that gave the kids a sense of security. You need to do that too as a believer of moving out into space, as members of the Mars Society. Keep your family together. Keep your connections. Let others, when you're down, others will boost you up. There are a lot of reasons to be down right now about what's going on in the space business. I personally think we're going to come out of this okay. That's just my opinion. So you may want to tap into me occasionally. I'll give you an optimistic report. It'll help you out. The last one in Coalwood was we trusted in God, but we relied on ourselves. Now, whether you believe in God, that's not my problem today. But whatever belief set that you believe in, there's something bigger, much bigger than us out there. Everybody knows that. You just feel it in your gut. There's something big out there, and it's good, and it's going to move us ultimately in the right direction. You have to believe in that. So trust in God, but rely on yourself. That means you got to go get the wrenches out, get the welding set out, build that rocket, and make it fly. So folks, I'm with you. I'm one of you. Go forth and do good. Thank you. I'll be happy to take questions. I think we're right up against the limit, but if there's our time limit, but if there's anybody has just a burning question that can't wait, okay? Uh-oh.
First question, how long did it take you to rebuild that fence? The second question, did you marry one of the children?
First question is, I didn't have to rebuild it. There were company carpenters who needed the job. They were happy to come down and do it. Second, I did not marry one of the cheerleaders. There's a great, Dorothy Plunk was the name of the girl that I absolutely adored. I ended up with a girl in the book in the back seat of the car called, her name was Valentine. They left it out of the movie mostly. But I ended up marrying a Huntsville girl. Her father is a rocket scientist and an author, so, I guess she was looking for a younger version. And I'm happy I did. Yes, sir.
Do you have children that are interested in space?
We don't have kids, we're raising cats instead of kids. I do have a lot of nieces and nephews that I'm putting through school. And we also have scholarships at Virginia Tech. I'm a Hokie. And Marshall University and Concord University, where Miss Riley went to college. So we're putting your kids through school, and otherwise we're just raising our cats. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I do appreciate this opportunity to speak to all of you. I do have a website, of course, HomerHickam.com. You have to know how to spell Hickam, Hickam. .com, and I'm also out on Facebook, marketing like crazy. The next book out, don't forget, is called Crater. It's the first in the Helium-3 series, set on the moon 150 years from now. I haven't, maybe I'll send, Crater is the name of the young man in the book. Maybe I'll send him to Mars next, Robert, so in a second. So not sure Mars has Helium-3, but hey, it's fiction. We can do whatever we want to do, right? All right. Thank you so much. You're welcome.